Hey everybody, it's your man James, Mr. Quinn Treasures, back again with some more video action for you. Today's another jaunt into the realm of possibilities that never were, as we find out how it should have been a comic. And for those of you who don't know what that is, this is a little show I do on here where I take a old cartoon of the past that I enjoyed and watched that for some reason or another never got a comic book representation, despite how many lesser shows even got that, but yet these ones didn't for some odd reason. So we're going to explore that, find out maybe some of why that is, and maybe come up with some ideas on how they could actually make it a comic today if they wanted to try. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. And before I announce today's winner, shall we say, in the contest here of the shows, I want to thank you all for joining me today and say that if you like what you see here, drop a like down there to help out the algorithms. Always appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys doing that to help out the channel. Also, be sure to drop me some comments on there. Let me know what you think about the show that I talk about, or if you think it'd be a worthwhile comic or whatever. Drop it down below. I want to hear what you guys got to say, as always. And be sure to share out some links. Let's bring some more people in so I can pump up those subscription numbers to get them moving in the proper direction. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you have yourself so you don't miss any of the content that I'm putting out around here. And so with that out of the way, let's get into our show. The end of the year is coming up here, and it's coming up quick. So we gotta try to get as many videos as I can. And so here we go with this one. It's Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors. Yes. This one's a funny one because I remember this growing up as a kid. There was so many facets to this, and I found out some fascinating stuff that I didn't even know about this series, and that's one of the things I like doing this series, because it gives me some new insights into some of my favorite cartoons. But it's again the classic good versus evil. It's got like a rockin' intro song. It's got great animation of the time. It's just it's got like the mystical mixed with sort of like the high tech future stuff with a little bit of like science gone wrong, all this kind of stuff. There's many different facets in this show, and again, which why I think not making a comic is a mistake, because there's so many different ways you could go with it. But like I said, as I always do here, before I get into all my stuff, I just say, hey, let's let the show speak for itself. So we'll get me off the screen here, because we don't need to see me on here. And then what I do is I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here with you guys, and we're going to look at the actual intro song to the series, because what better way for the show to tell you about itself than with its own words, right? So here we go.
Thundering across the stars to save the universe from the monster minds, Jayce searches for his father to unite the magic root and lead his lightning league to victory over the changing form of Sawboss. Wheeled warriors explode into battle. Lightning strikes.
There's a power that comes from deep inside of you. It's every day reaching toward the light. And that's a long way from you. But when your wheels get you there, things will turn out right. Just keep on turning, don't stop rolling. Fire song, real warrior. The drums burning, wheels moving, real warrior. Come take a chance, keep on turning, don't stop rolling. The fire song, real warrior. The drums burning, wheels moving, real warrior.
And there it is, Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors. Now tell me, that was not the most rockinest intro you've ever heard, is it not? That is like, you can't top that. I don't know how you top that. That's just so 80s. It's the rock, and you got the guy when he's hitting those Wheeled Warriors in the end of the song. That's my wife, who's a dyed-in-the-wool metal fan, says that's like the metal voice, those screeching high tones, those high notes. It just sets you up. And, you got to love the narrator at the beginning, who we're going to talk a little bit about here in a minute. Just that voice of his. He had the ability to make anything sound cool. I've heard his voice on many narrations for cartoons and stuff like that. And, man, that voice just made anything sound cool. The most silliest of concepts, and yet it would sound cool, and that's what, and again, this to me is what great cartoons are all about. It's got a rocking song, and listen to those lyrics. It's all very inspirational too, it's very inspirational. So when you listen to those lyrics, it's like uplifts you, and you feel like you can do anything. You feel like you're coming out of a Rocky movie, that's how it feels. And that's, again, one of the reasons I love the show so much, is because you had all that going on. And, again, it's just a fun thing. But here's the thing, as with almost all 80s properties at the time, this was based upon a toy line. It was a toy line that was out first, and then they created the series around it to sort of try to attract attention, so the kids would want to go out and buy the toys. I mean, that's what this all. The whole show was based as a marketing ploy, just to get you to buy the toys. But yet, like I said, when you look at some of these series, you see people who worked on them and stuff, you can see that, like, they didn't just take it as, oh, this is just to help sell toys. They actually try to make something, interesting. They try to make something fun. They try to make something, entertaining for kids. And, that's again, something that's very much missing in a lot of our stuff today. So, but there we go. We don't need to keep sharing that right now. And, now I'm going to bring up some images here, because that's what I always do, is I go into the details with you guys about what the show is and, whatnot. And so I just leave a little image on here for you guys just to view, so you can have something to look at while I'm giving you all the details. And here we go. Oh, sorry about that, folks. Boomering it up. Just boomering it up. Let's see if we can share it screen again. Let's try again, guys. There we go. Wouldn't be this channel if there wasn't some boomerang going on, would there? Okay, but here's our character Jayce and his companion Un, who is sort of like the squire to Jayce's knight. And that's what we're going to get into is like the basic premise of the story here. Now, you saw that, in the intro of what the whole story basically is. It's about a young man who gets together a group of fighters who go up against the monster minds who are trying to take over the universe, and he's trying to find his father and unite what they call the magic root to take out Saw Boss and his guys once and for all, and save the universe from, the monster minds' evil machinations. And, it's just very, very typical stuff. You wouldn't have expected, like deep seated, themes in this, but but they do this by way of their vehicles. As that's again the whole thing of the premise of the toys is they fight the monster minds in their vehicles, and the monster minds themselves can transform into vehicles, as you saw in the intro. And that's kind of how the whole works. So you got the whole thing here again. It's good versus evil, the classic thing. But yet what you really see here is, in a way you could look at it in another way, is like it's sort of, modern technology versus environmentalism type stuff. Because, the monster minds are plants. That's what it is. And the whole basis behind it is that Jayce's father and Gillian, the guy you saw, the wizard-looking dude, they are the creators of Saw Boss. Because what they were doing is they were trying to create a way to end world hunger. And in the process, they created Saw Boss and the monster minds. And so again, science gone bad. Good intentions, but yet it all went bad on everybody. And that's kind of where this all goes from. And so, like I said, see, so right there you got some richness in the story that isn't just your basic, just basically good guys versus bad guys type of thing. It's like a little step up above, say, the Super Friends, as far as like themes and stuff like that. And then, Then you got the whole question of like technology versus nature, all that kind of stuff in there. Like there's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of subtext that if you really look hard at it, it's more than just your typical show. And one of the people who actually worked on this series is someone all you comic guys will know, J. Michael Straczynski. Yes, the creator of Rising Stars over at Image, and unfortunately the same guy who also helped co-write the One More Day fiasco in Amazing Spider-Man. Yes, that J. Michael Straczynski. He wrote about a quarter of the episodes of this series, which lasted, get this, it's only one season, but it lasted 65 episodes, which I think is longer than any other series that I've done so far in this series. So it's kind of funny how many episodes they had. 65 episodes in one season, because I guess it's like a five days a week, and you put it out there for like several months, and hey, there you go, you're going to have a whole bunch of episodes. But here's the funny part, is that when the series came to an end, it ended without a proper ending. The show was canceled after one season because the toy line was failing. The cartoon didn't help the toy line, and then the cartoon may have had decent ratings or whatever, but it wasn't enough to save it because the whole point of it was to get kids to buy the toys, and it wasn't working, so they just canned the series, and they never gave it a proper proper ending. So the story like kind of ends in like a limbo, and you don't really find out kind of what happens. They kind of just sort of like leave it hanging of what's what happened there. So you never really got the closure, because like this really feels like a series to me, like it was built that it was going to have a definitive ending, and they never gave you the ending. They just kind of said, hey, we're just going to end it because we're not making the money on the toys that we thought we were going to make. But they did have an idea for the ending, because even though the series got canceled, and they didn't do that, Straczynski himself has come out and said that they had considered doing a film version of Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors, a la, say, like Transformers and G.I. Joe, when they made their movies, to kind of look sort of like end their runs with those properties. Although Transformers are on a little bit longer after that movie, but like they kind of did it that way. They were going to do the same thing for Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors, if the toy sales hadn't failed, the production would have begun. They would have done that, but he did write a script, to end the series, but it got shelved when they decided to shelve everything because the toy line failed. The movie, it would have been like the finale of the series, with Jayce and the Lightning League meeting, the being trained on the homeworld of the Guardians, and then Jayce would have been reunited with his father, and they would have finally taken Saul, Boss, and the Monsters Minds out in the final assault on the galaxy in a final battle, and and thus ending the Monster Mind threat forever. So it was going to be like the classic heroic ending of like the good guys win in the end, because it was the 80s, and that's what we were all about back then, was all about the positivity. Good guys always come out on top in the end, no matter how dark it gets. In the end, it's all going to turn out right. That's kind of like, that to me is the 80s in a nutshell as far as entertainment goes. That's how you saw stuff. And they actually had that planned, but it just never happened because they shelved it because of the toy line failing. So again, it's just kind of a funny thing to me is how we never got that closure, that definitive ending to the series. And it would have been interesting to see that. I mean, I've always hated when they end stuff and they don't give you that closure, because that's just to me just wrong. Is if you're going to put it out there and it's going to be an ending, give us the ending. We all want to know how the story ends. It's not right to leave us hanging. But as I've said with this, so it should have been a comic. Yeah, I think this easily could have been a comic. You could have had, like, again, just go with the vibe of the show, just the little bit of cheese that it is, but you could have had a classic good versus evil, or you could have took it, like I said, in the more maybe make the Monster Minds more like a avatar for like environmental stuff against technology. And you could get a little deeper into that side of the story. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of ways you could go with this to make it a really great comic that would have been great. And, the funny thing is, though, is they did try. This isn't a series that never had any comics whatsoever. That's the funny part, which is, oh, and then why are you saying it should have been cut? Because, again, just like the series, it didn't really pan out. And because you got this right here, I'm going to show you this now. These little mini comics, they actually came, I believe, with the toys, and there are little stories in them, but they don't ever specify Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors themselves, like the characters in the show. It's more like just this is the operator of the vehicle, and they show like a battle or whatever with one of the monster minds in these little mini comics that came with the toys. So it's not really based on the series. So it doesn't really have much of a connection there. So I don't know if you really want to say that qualifies. I mean, technically it's a comic because it has Real Warriors in the name and it has the ships, the vehicles. But does that really qualify it as like being representative of the series? I don't think it does. But one thing that did, and again, this is, like I said, this is where I found out some stuff. I didn't know this. There's this comic called Piff in France, and this is an uncredited and unfinished comic based on the property of Wheeled Warriors. It's called Piff Gadget number 992. That's what this one is, issue 992. And the adventure in here ends. It's a 13-page story that ends on a cliffhanger. And the next issue did not include the follow-up story, and the conclusion was never published. So here you got, again, it's kind of funny. It's like the comic they tried to get for this suffered the same fate as the television story itself. It's kind of funny to me that way, that's how that worked out, because he wouldn't have expected that the toy line, taking out the series is bad enough, but here you had to try to get a comic going, and even with the comic they couldn't get it going, and that was left on a cliffhanger ending. You get no closure no matter where you go. That's kind of funny to me how that turned out, But yeah, so technically you can say they made a comic, but considering they didn't really. It's just 13 pages. It doesn't really give you a very in-depth story behind it. And they left it at a cliffhanger ending where you don't know what happens. And so it's really, to me, it doesn't feel like, again, it was given a proper shot at a comic. So even though there's technically a comic for it, it really didn't really get that proper chance. And so that's why I'm thinking it should get one. Because again, with 65 episodes, you had a lot of stuff in there you could work from in those episodes, And we'll just get another quick image here for you guys. Now, of course, as I said, as I always do, I like to give you some idea about the people involved in this. And again, a lot of the people who did the voices on this show didn't really go on to do a whole lot after that. The big exceptions are Len Carlson, who is Herc Storm Sailor, who is, if you're watching in the trailer there, he's the guy that gives you the thumbs up, that guy. And, that character was sort of based off of Han Solo. If you can believe that. They kind of based that character off of Han Solo, And let's see, what's the information I got here? He's a mercenary who's the proud owner and the pilot of the space barge Pride of the Skies 2. He used to have a close relationship with the Pirate Queen and was a member of the Pirates Guild. But once he becomes an intergalactic commando, he quit and joined up with Jayce and the Lightning League. But he was largely modeled after Han Solo. Again, this is very well known that they did this, and you can even see, like, when you're watching that intro and you see him, you can almost kind of see, like, they kind of like even try to make it look a little like Han Solo in animated form. So kind of interesting how they did that. And Len Carlson was the voice. And, he passed away back in 2006. But, he's done, again, a lot of voice work. And again, this is like one of those guys, again, he's just done a lot of work in voice work stuff here. Let's kind of go back through it here. He did a lot of stuff in the 60s. He was on the Captain America, Hulk, Submariner, Mighty Thor, Iron Man, and Spider-Man. All the stuff in the 60s they did. Remember Marvel had those 60s shows? He was one of those guys doing voices for characters in there. In fact, in the Spider-Man one, he was the voice of the Green Goblin. How awesome is that? In the Mighty Thor one, he was the voice of Loki and Odin. Just great stuff right there. Just right there is just kind of cool. He got a guy from the 60s doing this. And then, he was did some episodes of the Care Bears. He did Popples. He did Dinosaucers. He did Alf Tales, which is the Alf cartoon series. If you guys remember that, Alf had a short-lived cartoon series. He did the Super Mario Brothers show. He did The Legend of Zelda. He did Cops. He did Captain N, the Game Master. I mean, again, these are all ones I grew up watching. I know all this stuff. I've watched them all. He did He did voices for characters on the Beetlejuice cartoon series in like the late 80s, early 90s. Remember that one? You know, he did Hammerman, the MC Hammer cartoon. The big one, though, here is probably he did voices for the X-Men series in the 90s. He was Jubilee's foster father, and he was also Senator Robert Kelly in the series. So, I mean, you know, again, he played a lot of voice work with this guy. He's done so much voice work, you know, and let me see here. Is there anything here that he did like towards the end? That would be notable by you guys. Yeah, I mean, he did some stuff, but it was all smaller stuff after that. Like the big one was like the X-Men, and then after that, he kind of went to do a lot of stuff. He did Swamp Thing cartoon series that had like 5 episodes. It was like a mini series. He did that. He did a few other things like that. But again, like the X-Men was the big one. But like this is a guy again. He just, if you look through his catalog, I mean, it's a lot of work. I mean, you know, for the time he was doing it, from the 60s all the way up until, you know, right before he passed, you know, he was doing the voice work. So I'm talking like, you know, 40 years of voice work. I mean, you know, has a lot of credits to his name. And, you know, so he was definitely one of the big ones on the show. But the only other person really of note as far as voice work goes on the show, again, is, as I noted before, that narrator, Ernie Anderson. You know, he was the one who did that great voice we heard, you know, telling us about, you know, lightning strikes, you know, just made it awesome. And you know, he died back in 1997. And this is a guy who, you know, he's, you know, again, he's got a very large, you know, credits, you know, to his name too. And but it wasn't just Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors. I mean, he did a lot of stuff like in actual acting, where his voice was used too. You know, like let's see, he was on an episode of Gunsmoke. He did the Tim Conway Comedy Hour. He was on an episode of Benson. He was the narrator for, again, one of my favorite 80s TV properties, short-lived, was Street Hawk. He was the narrator of the series Street Hawk, uncredited, of course, but he was the voice in the beginning of every episode. You saw that was his voice. Like I said, that voice could make anything sound cool, no matter how silly the concept was. You know, he was a narrator on Revenge of the Nerds 2, Nerds in Paradise. He was on an episode of Mr. Belvedere. You know, he did, you know, Joe Bobbin's Drive-In Theater. You know, he was on Parker Lewis Can't Lose, another show I remember, another short-lived show. He did voice work for Animaniacs. You know, just like I said, just a lot of stuff. Again, that voice was just so distinct. You know, you heard that voice, you knew that voice. You didn't know the name, but you knew the voice. And like I said, it made it sound so cool, so epic. And, you know, that's what I really liked about, you know, that intro with him doing the voice work, was making it so epic that way. It made it a lot of fun. And let's see, is there any other tidbits here I've learned? Let me go through my notes here and see if there's anything else I've learned about the series. Yeah, it was, if you looked at it, they say it was a mix of Star Wars with Mad Max and Jason and the Argonauts. And you can kind of see all of that in the show. See, again, this is why I think a comic would be such a natural thing. You got, like, you know, the whole epic journey, the epic odyssey. You've got, you know, monsters and high tech and a battle of good against evil. It seems so fit for a comic book line. You know, I could see, you know, some smaller, hey, you know what? I think maybe a smaller company like Titan Comics is doing a great thing with Conan. I'd love to see them do a Wheeled Warrior series. I'd buy it. You know, you see, and like I said, and like that's the thing about the show is you know, unlike a lot of other cartoons at the time that were based on toys, you know, like unlike He-Man's and the Masters of the Universe, lots of toys, and they had a cartoon series for it, but there's no backstory for the Lightning League and the Monster Minds in the story here. So, you know, it was all, you know, created out of whole cloth by DIC, the company in charge, and J. Michael Straczynski, to create that structured story of Jayce and the Wheeled Warrior, which, again, like I said, is why, you know, even though there was that one French comic that kind of touched on him, they didn't really go into it very much, you know. And so there's a whole lot of stuff you can mine in there to be awesome. And you know, what is it here? Yeah, Jayce's name is Jayce, is short for Jason. Though why they spelled it Jayce, I don't know. It's I guess one of those things we're never gonna have the answers to. Like I said, and the story can be seen. The story can be seen as an allegory between the fight between technology against the environment and out of control in rebellion against the human race, and that's exactly what the premise is. And so, like I said, you could so many ways, so many angles you can work on something like that. Man versus nature, environment versus technology. So many angles, and that could be explored, and again with our modern times. And then, of course, like I said, Un, his little squire there, he was modeled after medieval knights for kids. He's the classic cipher for us kids. Like the character that you're supposed to imagine that's you. He's your portal into the world that these people inhabit. And the music of the show was done by let me see here. I got the names right here. Let's see. Come on, where's that? I had it here for a moment ago. Levi Shuki and what's his name? Haim Saban. Again, these guys masters in the 80s. I mean, like I said, you saw me mention them in some of my previous episodes of this series, that they were the ones doing all these theme songs and stuff. And again, the vocals were by let's see, who was the vocals by? I'm trying to go through my notes here, folks, to give you all the info. Was by Nicholas Carr. That was the guy who was singing it, hitting those high notes, those metal voice notes, as my wife would qualify them as. Yeah, again, it's a really great series. Like I said, it had a lot of action in it, and like I said, you have so many different angles in which to attack this show from. So many things you could do with it that made it, just a very rich tapestry to mine great stories from. And that's what's missing in a lot of the comics today. I think you have people who are they're retreading retreads of retreads. They don't have anything original to say. They don't have anything original to give. And they're just treading on what has come before. Whereas this has you could go so many directions with this. You could go post-apocalyptic. Maybe pick it up if you want to do a series. Pick it up after the series and say that maybe they lost the battle against the monster minds and now they're like a freedom force that's fighting underground. How about that? That'd be a great angle to take with this. You could take the post-apocalyptic route with it, or maybe you could take it to the other extreme, to the other side, and say, you know what, they won, but now they thought the monster minds were dead, but of course they weren't, and maybe now a new threat has emerged as a result of the monster minds. When they took the monster minds out, maybe it helped create a vacuum there, which something else fills that vacuum of power, and now there's a new threat to face. I mean, there's so many ways you could bring this show back in a comic format, with lots of great action and great adventure and great stories, of heroism and the human drama of it all. And I really think that's something that they really should think about. Again, I would love a Wheeled Warriors comic book. I would totally buy that. I would think it would be a great thing. Again, just you could aim it more at kids, or you can aim it more at teens, however you wanted to go with it. Because like I said, there's so many facets in this story, and I think a lot of people, they tend to underestimate kids and treat them like, they're just they can't understand stuff. But like, hey, we saw these types of cartoons as kids, and hey, we got it, we understood it. So I think they really need to start focusing on trying to, because that's what I've seen in the comic book industry itself. They try to break things apart too much. Like here, these are the comics that are aimed more adult minds, and here's like ones for kids. Here's the kiddie fare. And it's like, I think you do kids a disservice with that, because I think kids are a lot smarter on this stuff than anybody wants to ever realize that they are, And I think this series, this kind of a cartoon, this is like one that kind of bridges that gap, where it's got like some adult themes. So like you're an adult, or you're like, like a teenager, someone more older, you could get into it because of some of the themes that are involved. But yet the themes aren't so harsh that you can't let a younger kid read it. And maybe they'll get into it from like the action standpoint or the cool designs or whatever. And that's how they'll get into it. And you could like get sort of like a cross pollination of, of age demographics in your comic, and which is something that is so lacking in the industry today. And I really want to see that change, but I know it's not going to change so long as, we're all still, breaking things apart the way they do now. But yeah, definitely Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors. This is one, again, that rockin' theme song. Oh my God. It's just, do you not feel inspired listening to those lyrics? Do you not feel head up, like I can go out and take on the world? That's awesome. And I want to see some of that in the comics again too. And I think Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors could be a great comic that could help bring that back. Let Titan Comics take these guys on, let them do it. Or, maybe even the guys at Dynamite, provided they get some decent talent on the books, of course. We don't want another Jason Aaron situation like we're having with Thundar, where I got to worry about is he going to just break the characters, because that's what Jason Aaron tends to want to do. But yeah, like I said, so many possibilities here. Futuristic, post-apocalyptic, maybe, a utopian society that is now being inundated by a new threat. I mean, there's so many ways that you could go about this. Maybe Jayce now is older and now he's in charge, and, now he's got to deal with things in a way that he didn't before when he was the freedom fighter. I mean, there's so many things you could do. And I'd love to see some of that done. But, again, Wheeled Warriors, again, just another one. It was based off a toy. They didn't think much of it. But yet, to me, there's so much richness there that they overlooked. And I think it would be great to bring it back in comic book format. And there we have it, Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors. Another one that I thought was just a great series that didn't get the love it deserved at the time. And, got kicked out real quick because the toys didn't sell, and just some of the crazy things that happened in the 80s. That's what the 80s were. There was the time of just wildness, and that way in the entertainment industry. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed checking this out. With the Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors, again, another one of my, and again, I think one of the top 10 intro songs of all time ever done. I don't think it'll be hard pressed to find much that's going to top that one. But I thank you all for joining me today, and I just want to say again, hey, let me know what you think. Do you think Jayce and the Wheeled Warriors could be a cool comic book? Do you think did I'm on the money with this, or do you think that it's just something it was a throwaway thing that it was only tied to a toy line and just it's better off that it's dead? Let me know what you guys think down below. I want to hear what you got to say. Also, be sure to check out those links linked below so you can see more stuff that I'm doing around here. And I will be back soon with some more stuff. As we all know, the holidays are coming up upon us very rapidly, and I want to get that stuff out to you as much as I can. And of course, I got a Why It's Great, which will be focused on the holidays, of course, because why wouldn't I? But I thank you all today, and I hope you join me for that and other future installments here. And I will be back soon with some more stuff. And until next time, take care.